1911, Beechwood at Newport. The ballroom Caroline Astor built to hold the 400, filled instead with a congregational minister brought down from Providence because no Episcopal priest in America would perform the ceremony, marrying a divorced 47-year-old to an 18-year-old girl who had left Miss Spence's school the previous winter. And she was not the only one. 16 years earlier, a Vanderbilt wife had named her husband's Paris mistress in open court and taken $10 million and Marble House and all 3 of his children. 1,200 miles west, in a Dakota hotel with a piano on the top floor, a niece of William Astor had swept out of a courthouse with her decree in her hand and, the following Monday morning, married her waiting fiancé in her hotel parlor 30 minutes later. 3 ways to break a powerful man. If the marriages the Gilded Age built for you make your stomach turn, subscribe. I go deep into these lives every week, and you will not see the American Gilded Age the same way afterward. Chapter 1. The Cage the Law Built. A married woman in 1895. New York had almost the same legal standing as her hat, and the hat could at least be sold without her husband's countersignature. She could not vote. She could not, in many states, hold property acquired during the marriage in her own name. She could not, until the patchwork of married women's property acts finally caught up, keep her own wages if she earned any, sign her own contracts, or sue in her own name. The doctrine that swallowed her was called coverture, and the common law had held for centuries that, on the day of the wedding, her legal personality merged into her husband's like a stream running into a river. What she brought in became his. What she earned became his. Even the children, in most jurisdictions, were his. That was the shape of the cage. The door out of the cage was a divorce, and the legislatures of the American Eastern Seaboard had made sure the door was almost impossible to open. In New York State, from 1787 until 1966, an absolute divorce could be granted on one ground and one ground alone. Proven adultery, not cruelty, not desertion, not drunkenness, not the routine keeping of a Paris mistress in a Deauville villa. Just adultery in open court, testified to by witnesses. And even then, the plaintiff had to have lived in the state for 12 continuous months first. South Carolina forbade divorce outright until 1949. Most other eastern states offered wives a menu barely wider than New York's. England required aggravated adultery, adultery plus cruelty or rape or incest. Spain and the Netherlands were even more restrictive. Then there was the social convention, which did the work the law could not do. A divorced woman was cut. She was not invited. She was not received. Her name was quietly struck from the guest lists that ran the season. If she remarried too soon after the decree, the churches would refuse to bless the union, and if she remarried at all, she might discover that the courts of her home state considered her divorce unrecognized and her second marriage a form of bigamy. The whole architecture was built to make her stay. It is important to state plainly what this meant in the ordinary week of an ordinary Fifth Avenue wife, because the abstract legal language flattens what was, in the flesh, a machinery of surveillance and small daily humiliations. A married woman in the New York of the 1880s could not open a bank account without her husband's countersignature. She could not, in most jurisdictions, execute a lease. She could not, if she was left with a modest inheritance from her own father, spend the interest on it against her husband's will. Her wardrobe was, technically, replaceable at her husband's discretion. Her children were, legally, his to remove from her care, if he chose to press the point. And in the specific case of the American upper class of the era, whose fortunes flowed by inheritance and by railroad and by land and by the Manhattan rent roll, the wife's own signature was, on almost every document that mattered, worth exactly nothing. The Married Women's Property Acts had been slowly, unevenly, and grudgingly conceded across the American states from the 1830s onward. New York had passed the first of its statutes in 1848 and its more substantial revision in 1860. Massachusetts followed, Pennsylvania followed. But the acts covered only separate property brought into the marriage or expressly settled on the wife by her own family. They did not, in most states, cover earnings during the marriage. They did not cover the household. They did not, and this is the piece that mattered for the wives of this video, cover the wife's grounds for divorce or her standing in a divorce court. What the acts had done, in effect, was create a legal category of wife who owned a lot and controlled almost none of it. Alva Vanderbilt would be one, Ava Willing Astor would be one, Baroness Maggie De Stuers would be one. All three were sitting on separately settled fortunes their husbands could not technically spend, and all three were locked inside marriages the law of their home state would not release them from. The one weakness in the whole architecture, and the wives at the center of this video found it, was the courtroom door itself. A courtroom door, once prized open, does not close cleanly. Alva Vanderbilt prized the door open in Manhattan in the spring of 1895 and paid the social cost for the rest of the century's other wives. Ava Willing Astor waited out the one mother-in-law who could keep it closed, and then, with the sitting American president's own brother as her counsel, turned the courtroom itself into a sealed operating theater. And 1,000 miles west of Fifth Avenue, in a Dakota town of 10,000 people, a state statute inherited from the frontier turned the courthouse door into a full corridor with a queue. 3 wives, 3 husbands, and the machine that grew up around them and took hundreds more. The door, once opened, is what this story is about. Chapter 2. The Girl from Mobile Who Married a Vanderbilt. Alva Erskine Smith was born in Mobile in 1853 to a cotton fortune that would be dead by the time she was 10. Her father, Murray Forbes Smith, was a Mobile commission merchant with plantation interests, respectable inside the old antebellum trade, and utterly dependent on the price of American cotton in the Liverpool exchanges. Her mother, Phoebe Ann Desha, came out of a Kentucky political family. The Smiths moved north to New York around 1859 as sectional tensions rose and installed themselves inside a southern merchant class that Manhattan was already beginning to view with suspicion. Then the war came. The cotton fortune died. Reconstruction finished it. Murray took broking work in the north of England and installed his wife and daughters in Paris, where they could be respectable on less money than New York required. Alva went to Madame Coulon's school in Neuilly. She learned French, art, the Beaux-Arts idiom that would later dictate her houses. She learned the shape of European drawing rooms. She learned what a duchess looked like at breakfast. She learned, above all, the exact catalog of manners that the American Knickerbocker aristocracy could not sneer at, because it had ordered the same catalog from the same Paris workshops. What a Southern American girl absorbs in the Paris of the Second Empire, when her own family cannot afford the season Paris expects her to keep, is a permanent alertness to the difference between money and the memory of it. Alva absorbed it. She would spend the next 40 years buying, in cash, everything Mobile had cost her father to lose. When the Smiths came back to New York around 1869, in reduced circumstances, Alva was already fluent in the language the old money spoke to itself. Her mother died in 1871. Her father died on May 4, 1875. Alva, by then, 22 years old, motherless, effectively fatherless, was already married to a Vanderbilt. The introduction had been made by her closest childhood friend, a Cuban-American girl named Consuelo Iznaga, who would later become the Duchess of Manchester, and who would, at the close of Alva's story, be named as a co-respondent in her divorce. Consuelo Iznaga knew the second surviving son of the Vanderbilt Railroad line, William Kissam Vanderbilt. He was grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, the New York Central heir, next in line for the family's railway operations. He was quiet, competent, decent by the standards of the second generation of a large American fortune, and about to inherit more money than most European sovereigns had ever seen. Alva married him on April 20th, 1875, and stepped inside a fortune that would multiply almost tenfold in the next 10 years. The introduction had been made in one of the more subtle transactions of American society, the sort of unofficial exchange between two families that did not quite appear in the New York papers. The Vanderbilts in 1875 were still a fortune that the 400 did not quite receive. The Smiths in 1875 were a lineage that Paris had received and Mobile had lost. The match squared a private ledger neither family cared to name in public. Consuelo Iznaga performed the introduction. Willie proposed. Alva accepted. Her father, dying, gave his consent in writing. 6 weeks after the wedding, Murray Smith was dead, and Alva, alone inside the vastness of the Vanderbilt fortune at 22, holding the funeral bills for the man who had raised her in Paris and lost her fortune along the way, was already, by any accounting, the surviving Smith family could perform, ahead of the game. The Vanderbilt scale is difficult to state without collapsing into a scale paragraph, so let me plant just a few numbers to hold the frame. William Henry Vanderbilt, the head of the family, died on December 8, 1885, leaving an estate reported at about $200 million. William Kissam Vanderbilt, the second son, inherited approximately $55 million in his own hand in 1885. $55 million in 1885 is roughly $2 billion in modern equivalents. And Alva Vanderbilt, 26 years old and only just recovering from the birth of her third child, was the woman entrusted to spend it. She had 3 children. Consuelo, named after her mother's Iznaga friend, born on March 2, 1877. William Kissam Vanderbilt II, born on October 26, 1878. Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, born on July 6, 1884. Alva loved them the way a woman raised inside a collapsing fortune loves her children, fiercely, instrumentally, as if their existence might, if she managed them correctly, undo the shame of watching her father die in reduced circumstances at the moment of her own wedding. She was going to build a fortress against that shame, and she was going to build it out of stone. Chapter 3. The ball that forced Mrs. Astor to leave a card. In March 1883, Alva Vanderbilt threw a costume ball for 1,200 guests at a $3 million chateau on Fifth Avenue. And she did it for exactly one reason. She wanted Caroline Schermerhorn Astor's calling card. She had been denied it. She had been denied it, in Alva's understanding of the situation, because the Vanderbilts were new money and because Caroline Astor and her master of ceremonies, Ward McAllister, had drawn a line in the New York season that read, "Our world and everyone else." Alva Vanderbilt had every intention of stepping over that line, and she had every intention of doing it in a costume constructed by the House of Worth in Paris. The chateau at the center of that campaign had been built by Richard Morris Hunt, the first American architect ever to train at the École des Beaux-Arts. Alva had hired him and told him to build a French Renaissance palace on Fifth Avenue at the corner of 52nd Street. Construction ran from 1878 into 1882. Contemporary reports set the cost at approximately $3 million. Alva called it the Petit Chateau. New York simply called it 665th Avenue and stared. 665th Avenue was, at completion, one of the largest single-family residences in New York. It had, above all, a scale and an idiom that were unmistakably European and unmistakably new, and that were, in combination, a public claim about the Vanderbilt family's readiness to be received by the 400. The claim had been carefully rehearsed. The chateau was the argument. The ball was the presentation of the argument. The Vanderbilt costume ball of March 26, 1883, was the housewarming. Alva planned it for approximately 1,200 guests. She commissioned costumes from Paris for herself and her sisters-in-law. She ordered elaborate quadrilles rehearsed in advance. She let it be known, quietly, that she had, of course, invited every young lady in the important houses of the city to take part in the quadrille rehearsals, and every young lady of every important house was thrilled to be included. Every young lady, that is, except for Caroline Astor's daughter Carrie, who had already been attending rehearsals and who now discovered through the columns of the newspapers that she could not, in fact, appear at the Vanderbilt ball because her mother had never left a card at the Vanderbilt house. Caroline Astor's carriage was seen at 665th Avenue within days. She left her card. The invitation to Carrie followed by return. That single carriage ride is the moment the Vanderbilts crossed the invisible line from money into society. It is one of the most photographed and most misunderstood moments of the entire American Gilded Age. The ball itself, when it happened, was, in the words of the newspapers of the following morning, the most lavish social event in New York's history. The Times, the Herald, the World, the Sun, the Tribune, each ran multiple columns. Alva was 30 years old. She was, by then, only just beginning. In 1886, Willie commissioned a new steam yacht, 285 feet long, at approximately $500,000. When it launched in 1887, it was the largest private yacht in the world, and Willie Vanderbilt had given it his wife's name, Alva. Around 1888, on the voyages that would eventually take the yacht around the world, a Newport neighbor of the Vanderbilts named Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, son of the banker August Belmont, joined the party as a guest. Alva and Oliver Belmont began, at some point on that yacht, the affair that would end her marriage. The yacht itself was rammed and sunk in fog off Martha's Vineyard in July 1892. Willie promptly ordered its replacement, the Valiant, and did not apparently understand what had been sinking with the first. Then there was Marble House. Between 1888 and 1892, Richard Morris Hunt built her a summer palace on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island, modeled on the Petit Trianon at Versailles. It cost approximately $11 million, of which about $7 million went on 500,000 cubic feet of white marble alone. It was, crucially, legally hers, in her name, as her separate property. The ownership documentation would matter enormously 3 years later, when the marriage began to disintegrate. By the summer of 1892, Alva Vanderbilt possessed one of the largest private houses on Fifth Avenue, a new steam yacht replacing the one just sunk, and a marble palace on the Newport Cliffs. She possessed a husband who had been, since around 1888, quietly maintaining a demi-mondaine in Paris, and she possessed the growing conviction that the American Gilded Age was going to have to learn a new grammar of scandal. Lassier Chapter 4. The Paris Mistress and the $10 million Decree. In late 1894, Alva engaged the attorney Joseph Choate and did what no woman of her station in America had done before her. She sued her husband for divorce on the ground of adultery in the open courts of the state of New York, naming as one of his co-respondents the père demi-mondaine Nellie Neustretter, whom Willie Vanderbilt had been openly maintaining at Deauville and squiring around European society for years. The filings implicated other women as well, including, in one of the crueler ironies of the Gilded Age's romantic bookkeeping, Alva's own former closest childhood friend, Consuelo Iznaga, then Duchess of Manchester, the same woman who had introduced her to Willie in the first place. The New York World, following the case day by day from January through March 1895, called it, straight into its headline, the biggest divorce case that America has ever known. The Herald agreed. The Times agreed. The Journal agreed. Every American newspaper of consequence carried it on the front page. The trial ran through January and February of 1895. The decree was granted in March. Every major New York paper covered it on the front page for 3 months. The New York World, following the case from January into March, called it, straight into its headline, the biggest divorce case that America has ever known. The settlement, when it came out, was of a size no American divorce court had ever awarded. Alva Vanderbilt received a sum in excess of $10 million, roughly $300 million to $390 million in modern equivalents depending on which price index you consult. She received an annuity of $100,000 a year for life. She received Marble House in Newport, which the settlement now confirmed as hers outright. And she received something no American divorce court had ever awarded a mother against a father from a first family. She received sole custody of all 3 of the Vanderbilt children, Consuelo, 17, William II, 16, Harold, 10. Willie kept idle hour on Long Island. Willie kept 665th Avenue. Willie kept his own share of the railway income. He did not keep his wife. He did not keep his children. He did not keep the Newport center of gravity, because Newport was Marble House and Marble House was Alva. He did not keep the moral high ground. He did not, when the decree was signed, keep the ability to remarry inside the state of New York. Because Alva had sued on the sole ground of adultery, and because she had won, the decree carried what the courts of that era called the guilty party clause. The guilty party in a New York adultery divorce was legally barred from contracting a second marriage inside the state during the lifetime of the wronged spouse. Willie Vanderbilt could not remarry in New York. And this, of everything the decree did to him, was the piece of it that hollowed him out most cleanly because it converted his private disgrace into a permanent, active, ongoing legal condition that followed him from courtroom to courtroom and from newspaper column to newspaper column. 8 years later, in April 1903, he had to petition the New York Supreme Court to modify the language. Justice Gigerich granted the modification. Willie remarried and moved permanently to France. There is a piece of the settlement that is worth naming for its own sake, because it is the piece the ordinary account of the Vanderbilt divorce leaves out. Alva took the children, not visiting rights on the children, not summer with the mother, winter with the father, alternating Christmases, birthday parcels sent through counsel. sole custody. Consuelo, William II, Harold. All three permanently transferred out of the paternal line of the Vanderbilts and into the maternal keeping of Alva Erskine Smith. For an 1895 court to have done that, in a case against a Vanderbilt of William Kissam's rank, was without precedent in American legal history. The children were, in the ordinary common law understanding of parental rights, his children. The decree said they were, from March 1895 onward, her children. That single provision of the settlement is the piece Alva later cared about most. She said so more than once. Marble House was pride. The 10 million was insurance. The children were the point. France was where the rest of Willie Vanderbilt's life happened, and it happened out of sight. He built a French country chateau at Carrières-sous-Poissy, outside Paris. He founded the Haras du Quesnay racing and breeding operation near Deauville, where the yacht Alva had once carried its owners into the affair that ended their marriage. He raised thoroughbreds. He collected paintings. He drank champagne. He was quietly excluded from the parts of the New York and Newport social calendars where his name had once been a courtesy. His brother, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, and Cornelius's wife Alice, took over the leadership of the New York branch of the family that Willie's position ought to have entailed. Willie became, in the end, a French-based turf figure. When he died in Paris on July 22, 1920, his gross probated estate was $54,530,966.59, a fortune that had barely dented over 25 years of European exile. The money was intact. Everything else about the man had been converted, by one Manhattan filing in the winter of 1894, into a permanent afterlife of horses. The Sunday after the decree, Alva went to church. Cooper and Howe, who have looked closely at the surviving contemporary accounts, describe the ritual public shunning she received that morning from the women present. She was cut, pretended not to exist. The pew next to hers left empty. The eyes passed her. The absence of a nod. It is important to name what the Sunday cut cost her, because the cost was real, and because it was the sacrifice she had priced into the entire transaction. She had paid the toll at the door. She had known, in December of 1894, exactly what a Sunday in St. Thomas Church would look like in March of 1895, and she had filed anyway. And she had filed for one reason. She had learned at 22 years old, from the sight of her father dying in reduced circumstances at the very moment of her wedding, that a woman who does not control her own money controls nothing at all. She had married one of the largest fortunes ever assembled in the United States, and she had discovered, over 20 years, that being married to it and controlling it were not the same thing. In March 1895, she converted marriage to that fortune into ownership of a substantial slice of it. The Sunday cut was the price. She paid it. She did not, in her own accounting, ever regret it. She said more than once in the years that followed that the divorce was the door. Within 8 months, she would use it to sell her daughter. Chapter 5. The daughter sold and the woman remade. 8 months after Alva took her husband's honor in a Manhattan courtroom, she took her daughter's freedom in a Manhattan church. Consuelo Vanderbilt was 18. She was tall, slender, blonde, corseted since childhood, socially trained by the same Alva who had ordered her wardrobe from Worth and her posture from a brace of steel. She had been in love, quietly and imperfectly, with a New York man named Winthrop Rutherford. Rutherford was 15 years older than she was, socially acceptable, socially insufficient in the terms Alva Vanderbilt had, by then set for the Vanderbilt name. Alva had been, since 1894, quietly negotiating through the matchmaker Minnie Paggi in London for the transfer of Consuelo to Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. The 9th Duke needed money. Blenheim Palace was crumbling around him. He had inherited the ducal title and the estate that came with it, and he had inherited debts on the estate that his own income could not service. He needed a large American dowry. Alva had one to sell. When Consuelo made plans to elope with Rutherford in the summer of 1895, Alva locked her in her bedroom at Marble House. This is not a metaphor. Consuelo's own memoir, published in 1953 under the title The Glitter and the Gold, describes the locked door. She describes being told that if she attempted to escape, her mother would kill Rutherford. She describes her mother's staged heart attack when the direct threats failed. She describes the intermediary who came to her room to tell her that her mother would never relent and that there would be a catastrophe if she persisted. She describes her surrender. She describes the astonishing recovery from the heart attack that followed. The wedding took place at St. Thomas Church in Manhattan on November 6, 1895. Consuelo, 18, wept behind her wedding veil. The 9th Duke of Marlborough, 24, told her on their honeymoon that he had married her only to save Blenheim Palace. The marriage settlement, which is a matter of public record, ran to approximately $2.5 million in Beech Creek Railroad stock placed in trust for the Duke, guaranteeing him at least $100,000 a year for life. Alongside that trust, the settlement covenanted to pay Consuelo herself $100,000 a year during her father's lifetime, and delivered $2.5 million to her personal trustees on his death. Contemporary press ran the total transaction figure as high as $5 million. Alva did not, at the time, admit that she had forced her daughter into the marriage. She admitted it on the record 31 years later. When Consuelo sought a Roman Catholic annulment from the Duke in 1926, Alva testified to the Vatican investigator under oath in a sentence that has since become the defining Alva quotation. "I forced my daughter to marry the Duke. I have always had absolute power over my daughter." The annulment was granted on August 19, 1926. 10 weeks after Consuelo's wedding, on January 11, 1896, Alva Vanderbilt married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont at her sister's house in New York. 10 weeks. Not because she had rushed, because she had planned. She and Oliver Belmont had, by every serious account, been in love since the yacht voyages of 1888, and the divorce and the remarriage were, as any careful observer of Newport had understood at the time, a single project stretched across 2 years. The Belmont marriage was quieter than the divorce. It was better than the Vanderbilt marriage. Oliver Belmont died on June 10, 1908, at 49, of complications from appendicitis, and left Alva alone at Belcourt in Newport with the Vanderbilt fortune, the Belmont fortune, and the political convictions she had been sharpening in private for a decade. She turned every remaining Vanderbilt Belmont dollar toward the vote. In 1909, she joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association. She founded the Political Equality Association. In 1914, she wrote a $5,000 check to Alice Paul's Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage and moved on to its executive board. That same summer, she built a red and black lacquered Chinese tea house on the cliff lawn of Marble House, seating 100 women at tables laid with china marked in gold, "Votes for Women." She hosted the Congressional Union's national conferences on the same terrace where, in the summer of 1895, she had negotiated the sale of her daughter to the 9th Duke. She served as president of the National Woman's Party through the 1920s. She died in her Paris apartment on January 26, 1933, at 79 years old. Her body was returned to New York for a funeral at St. Thomas Church, the same church where she had married her daughter off in 1895, and the same church where she had been ritually cut the Sunday after her decree. 1,500 people attended. Her pallbearers were all women. On her casket, someone had draped a banner reading in gold letters 3 words that had come out of Susan B. Anthony's mouth: "Failure is impossible." Alva had said it herself, many years earlier, in a line preserved by her friend Elizabeth Drexel Lair. "I always do everything first. I blaze the trail for the rest to walk in. I was the first girl of my set to marry a Vanderbilt. Then I was the first society woman to ask for a divorce. And within a year, ever so many others had followed my example." Alva had broken one door, in one state, against one husband. The next wife in this video would need to wait out her mother-in-law for 11 years, and then, with the sitting American president's own brother as her counsel, turn the courtroom itself into a sealed operating theater. It's Chapter 6, The Philadelphia Belle Who Married a Fortune She Despised. Ava Willing was the reigning belle of Philadelphia, and the last woman in America who thought marrying an Astor was doing him the favor. She was not, in her own accounting, marrying up. She was marrying down. She was born on September 15, 1868, in Newport, Rhode Island, to Edward Shippen Willing and Alice Caroline Barton, of a Philadelphia family whose social precedence in the American colonies predated the Astors by more than a century. Through her father, she descended from Thomas Willing, Revolutionary-era statesman, mayor of Philadelphia, business partner of Robert Morris, and the first president of the First Bank of the United States. From Edward Shippen, first mayor of Philadelphia. From William Moore, fourth president of Pennsylvania, under the Articles of Confederation. From William Barton, one of the two men who designed the Great Seal of the United States. The Willing money, when measured against the Astor Manhattan rent roll, was small. The Willing family, when measured against anything the New York Astors had accomplished before the 1780s, was old. Ava Willing had grown up between the Willing Mansion at 510 South Broad Street in Philadelphia and Newport Summers, and she had grown up understanding, in the specific way an American colonial daughter can understand these things, that she came from a country that had been established before the man she was going to marry had been born to a family that was still, in the strict accounting of colonial pedigree, in trade. She married Colonel John Jacob Astor IV on February 17, 1891, at her parents' mansion at 510 South Broad Street. The wedding was among the 2 or 3 most publicized society events of the American Gilded Age. Jack was the only son of William Backhouse Astor Jr. and of Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the arbiter of the New York 400, and the same woman who, in March 1883, had left her calling card at 665th Avenue and made Alva Vanderbilt possible. Jack Astor stood in line to inherit the real estate spine of Manhattan, the Astor rent roll from Harlem down to the Battery, dozens of blocks of grid-defining property, a hotel operation that would combine with his cousin's neighboring building to become the Waldorf Astoria, and, at his death in April 1912, an estate probated at $86,966,611. That figure translates to roughly $2.9 billion in modern equivalents. What it meant socially was simpler. When Caroline Astor finally died in October 1908, the leadership of New York society passed to her daughter-in-law, and her daughter-in-law was Ava Willing Astor. The Willings in Philadelphia terms were older than the Republic. The Astors in New York terms were newer than most of the buildings they owned. Ava had brought the older name to the altar. Astor money added to Willing pedigree was, in the arithmetic of 1891, the largest social composite fortune the American Eastern Seaboard could then assemble. She had brought it, according to her own reported private statements in the years that followed, without any particular tenderness for the man walking her back down the aisle. The marriage was, from very early on, a cold disaster. Jack Astor was, by every account written about him inside the marriage or after it, handsome, mechanically obsessed, quietly interested in inventions, personally awkward. He designed a bicycle brake. He designed a marine turbine. He developed the Astoria Hotel. He was, in a room, ungainly, anxious, painfully aware of not being clever. Ava was clever. She mocked him openly. Every documented account of the marriage from inside it agrees on the pattern. She called him stupid in front of strangers. She pronounced him repulsive, and told anyone who would listen that she had married him only for his name and money. The New York press, watching this at a distance, had already given him the nickname Jack Astor. He walked, according to a memoirist quoted in the American Aristocracy dossier, several paces behind her at social occasions, and he followed her about, in that same memoirist's line, like a bedraggled and slightly bad-tempered spaniel. Vincent Astor was born November 15, 1891, the year of the marriage. Ava refused to bear another child for 11 years. When Alice Astor was finally born on July 7, 1902, there was persistent, well-sourced gossip inside both families that Alice was not Jack's daughter at all, that she had been fathered by an English family friend named Cyril Henry Hatch. The gossip was never confirmed. It was never dispelled. It was one of the pieces of the marriage that meant, by 1902, that Ava was living most of the year in London, in a Grosvenor Square townhouse and a country residence called Regent Lodge in Regent's Park, and that Jack was living most of the year in New York, aboard his steam yacht Norma Hall, or at the Fifth Avenue mansion, alone. The one thing standing between Ava and a divorce was the woman in the mansion at the top of Fifth Avenue. Caroline Astor did not permit an Astor divorce. Caroline Astor was the 400, and Ava Willing Astor was going to wait her out. Chapter 7. The Sealed Courtroom in Rockland County. Caroline Astor died in October 1908. and within 12 months, her daughter-in-law had filed the largest divorce settlement in American history. The choreography was extraordinary, and it is the choreography, not the settlement figure, that tells you how completely Ava Willing Astor understood the machinery she was operating. She hired as her counsel Henry W. Taft, the younger brother of the sitting American president, William Howard Taft. Astor's counsel was Louis Cass Ledyard, because a divorce action in Manhattan would have exposed Jack Astor to adultery testimony in the only forum in the state where adultery testimony would qualify for a decree. The two lawyers arranged quietly to move the whole case out of the New York County courts. They routed it upriver into the New York Supreme Court, sitting at New City in Rockland County, 40 miles north of Manhattan, before Justice Isaac N. Mills. Mills had read the referee's report. Mills had already indicated that he was satisfied. The hearing itself was a formality. It happened on November 8, 1909. Henry Taft rose in the courtroom and said quietly, and in the words the following morning's Times printed verbatim, "I have a motion with which you are familiar and would like to have the judgment signed and an interlocutory decree granted." Justice Mills replied that he had read the referee's report and was of the opinion that the evidence justified the referee's findings. Louis Cass Ledyard rose and said that there were no objections. Justice Mills signed the interlocutory decree of divorce. Henry Taft moved that all papers in the case be sealed. The motion was granted. The name Astor was not spoken aloud in the courtroom. The Times ran the story the following day under the headline, "In the punctuation of the period, Mrs. Astor obtains divorce quietly." No names mentioned in proceedings before Justice Mills, who grants interlocutory decree. All papers in case sealed. And then, in the third paragraph, the sentence that ran on every American front page. It is currently reported that Colonel Astor made a settlement of $10 million in lieu of alimony. $10 million in 1891 purchasing power is one thing. $10 million in 1909 dollars is roughly $345 million in modern equivalents. It was, if the figure was accurate, and every serious historian accepts that it was substantially accurate, the largest divorce settlement ever paid in an American case at that date. The custody arrangement was settled out of court on the same discrete basis. Vincent Astor, then 18 and about to enter Harvard, stayed with his father, whom he adored. 7-year-old Alice Astor went with her mother into the Grosvenor Square house and the London Seasons. It is worth pausing on Henry Taft for a moment because the choice of counsel is the single most instructive detail in this whole hearing. William Howard Taft was, in November 1909, 10 months into the American presidency, sitting in the White House, running the executive branch of the federal government. His younger brother Henry was a senior partner at the New York firm of Cadwallader, Wickersham and Taft. When a divorce proceeding of that grade had a Taft on one side of the counsel table, no serious judge, no serious lawyer, no serious reporter, no serious opposing husband was going to make a public fuss. The name did the shielding. The papers were sealed because the name of the counsel had already sealed them by presence. Henry Taft cost his client a specific fee that has never been made public. Whatever the fee was, Ava Willing Astor paid it because what she was buying with it was silence. And where was Jack Astor while his marriage was being surgically ended by his wife's counsel and the president's brother in a Hudson River courthouse, with the papers sealed by court order and the name Astor unspoken? He was cruising the West Indies aboard the Norma Hall. It is the single sharpest detail in the entire second act of this video. The Times noted it specifically. The Times noted it because the reporter covering the story understood, in the way an experienced society reporter of 1909 understood these things, that a husband cruising the West Indies during the hearing that dissolves his marriage was a husband who had, at some point months earlier, agreed in principle to everything the hearing was going to do. The divorce was arranged, not fought. The final decree followed on March 5, 1910. Ava, on that date, was free. She had extracted quietly at the age of 41 more money than any American wife had ever extracted from any American husband. She had done it without a scandal she could not close. She had done it without adultery testimony that would have humiliated her son. She had done it with the sitting president's brother as her instrument. She had done it before her mother-in-law had been dead for a full 18 months. She had also, without meaning to, and without any way of foreseeing it, opened a door that ended in the North Atlantic. Chapter 8. The wedding no clergyman would perform. In August 1911, Jack Astor announced his engagement to an 18-year-old debutante, and the Episcopal Church of America closed ranks against him. The debutante was Madeline Talmadge Force. She had come out into New York society in December 1910, having just graduated from Miss Spence's school. She was 18 years old. Jack Astor was 47. The age difference between them was 29 years. Astor, at 47, was the recognized head of the Astor line in the United States, the wealthiest widower of a divorce in American society, and, in the arithmetic of 1911, Newport, the most photographed and least welcome man in the country. Madeline Force, at 18, was the least protected person in the transaction. The clergy were the first to react. Every reputable Episcopal minister in New York and Rhode Island refused en bloc to perform the ceremony. Several told reporters afterwards that they had been offered as much as $20,000 in 1911 money to marry the couple. $20,000. Not one accepted. Some cited church doctrine on the remarriage of a divorced man during the lifetime of the first spouse. Some cited the age difference and were quite happy for the newspapers to know they had cited it. Some cited both. The point of the collective refusal, as the newspapers themselves understood it, was not doctrinal, it was social. Newport was making a statement about what it would and would not tolerate under its steeples, and what it would not tolerate, in the second month of 1911, was Jack Astor. The couple was finally married on September 9th, 1911, in the ballroom of Beechwood at Newport by the Reverend Joseph Lambert, a congregational minister brought down from Providence, Rhode Island. Vincent Astor, then not yet 20, served publicly and reluctantly as his father's best man. Vincent privately loathed his stepmother, according to more than one source, for the rest of his life. Reverend Lambert, having performed the ceremony, discovered that he had cashed a check on his own future. Nationwide press denunciation followed him back to Providence. By November 1911, 2 months after the wedding, he had resigned his pulpit. The Rev. Joseph Lambert of Providence had, by every account, no particular record as an ambitious clergyman. He had a modest congregational pulpit in Rhode Island, a modest congregation, no visible political ambition, no history of society weddings. The offer that reached him at the end of August 1911 was, on its face, straightforward. A distinguished 47-year-old widower of divorce required a minister for a wedding at Beechwood in Newport on September 9th. The Episcopal clergy of the two states involved had declined. Would the Reverend Lambert be willing to travel down to perform the ceremony? There would be a fee. What Reverend Lambert did not, at the moment he accepted, entirely understand was that his willingness was, in the Newport newspapers of the following morning, going to become a national story with his own name attached to it, and that his own name was going to become, for the following 2 months, a small piece of shorthand for the moral looseness of the entire American congregational tradition. He did not understand it, because Rhode Island Congregationalism had not, until that morning, been the sort of institution whose ministers were tracked by the national press. He would understand it by dinner. Beechwood was the ballroom Caroline Astor had built to hold the 400. It had been Ava's throne, briefly from October 1908 until the divorce. Now it belonged, in effective usage if not legal ownership, to an 18-year-old girl who had left Miss Spence's school the previous winter. There is an image inside that fact that will not leave. The mother-in-law's ballroom, refashioned into a wedding chapel for a stranger because no proper chapel would take the wedding. Newport, having lost the argument over the clergy, made the point of the ceremony less relevant by declining to attend the couple's ordinary social occasions from then on. The Vanderbilts had received Alva after the 1895 divorce. Newport had cut Alva Vanderbilt for exactly one Sunday, and then, after her marriage to Oliver Belmont, had gradually taken her back. Newport did not take back Jack Astor. Nor did Newport take back Madeline Force. What Newport did instead was leave the couple's front door alone. No cards were dropped, no calls were received. The two entertained a small handful of loyalists, and were, as an emergent Newport rejoinder, entertained by no one. A honeymoon began to seem, to both of them, the only available social response. They took an extended honeymoon through Europe and Egypt. This is the polite phrase in the surviving press coverage. To wait for the gossip to calm down is the honest one. They traveled, they photographed themselves at pyramids, they wintered in the Eastern Mediterranean, they moved between hotels of a class that was expected to receive them without regard to the American calendar. Newport, they were persuaded, would rediscover its manners in due course. Newport did not. And then Madeline Force conceived. And the couple's parents in the United States began to send cables. The right thing, they were told, and the only thing an American of standing could do was to come home so that the child could be born on American soil, in the country where its inheritance would be adjudicated. The cables became insistent. The couple booked passage on a new ocean liner, White Star, largest steamer ever launched, first-class stateroom, sailing from Cherbourg on April 10, 1912, calling at Queenstown on April 11th, then out into the North Atlantic on a track that ran west toward New York. The liner's name was Titanic. Ava's decree of November 8, 1909, had not put Jack Astor on that ship. His marriage to Madeline Force had put him on that ship. But his marriage to Madeline Force had only been possible because Ava Willing Astor had already broken the first marriage, and it had only been necessary to go abroad because the divorce had made him socially untouchable in the only place his class ordinarily gathered. The causal chain, as the historian Justin Kaplan and as Encyclopedia Titanica both argue plainly, is not speculative. They booked the passage. They sailed. Chapter 9. Lifeboat 4 and the Wife Across the Ocean. 90 minutes after midnight on the morning of April 15, 1912, Second Officer Charles Lightoller was loading the last women onto lifeboat number 4 on the port side of the sinking Titanic. Jack Astor had helped his pregnant wife through a window into the boat with her maid Rosalie Bidois and her nurse Caroline Andres. He then turned to Lightoller, quietly, in the courteous and slightly hesitant manner that had always been his in a room, and asked whether he might be allowed to join his wife, because she was in a delicate condition. Lightoller, who was operating under the rule that no man was to enter a lifeboat while women remained on deck, said no. Colonel Archibald Gracie IV was standing at the next window and gave the following testimony to the United States Senate inquiry the following month. I heard Mr. Astor ask the second officer whether he would not be allowed to go aboard this boat to protect his wife. He said, "No, sir, no man is allowed on this boat or any of the boats until the ladies are off." Mr. Astor then said something to the effect of, "Well, tell me the number of this boat so I may find her afterwards," and was told, "Number 4. Jack Astor stepped back from the window. He kissed his wife. He watched lifeboat number 4 descend from the boat deck at 1:55 in the morning. He waited on the tilted deck. He drowned in the sinking of the Titanic at 2:20 in the morning of April 15th, 1912. Lifeboat number 4 pulled slowly away from the flank of the sinking liner into the flat calm of the North Atlantic. Madeline Force Astor sat in the boat, holding the hand of her maid Rosalie Bidois and her nurse Caroline Andres. She was, at that moment, 5 months pregnant. She was 18 years old. Her husband was still on the deck of the ship above her. His body was recovered on April 22nd by the cable ship Mackay Bennett. In his pockets there were $2,440 in United States banknotes, 225 pounds in English notes, 5 pounds in gold, a gold pocket watch, and a diamond ring. His body was identified by 2 monograms, the initials A.V. on his handkerchief, the initials J.J.A. on his collar. Madeline Force, aged 18, gave birth to John Jacob Astor VI on August 14, 1912. His father's gold pocket watch was later worn by Vincent Astor for the rest of his life. In April 2024, at auction, it sold for £1,175,000 sterling. Astor's probated estate went, in overwhelming preponderance, to Vincent. Vincent inherited $69 million outright, together with Ferncliff on the Hudson and the yacht Noma. Madeline Force received a $100,000 outright bequest and a $5 million trust fund contingent on her never remarrying. She remarried in 1916 and forfeited the trust. Alice Astor, still with her mother in London, received a $10 million trust. The posthumous John Jacob VI, born the following August, received a $3 million trust, payable at 21. Beechwood and 845th Avenue passed to Madeleine in life use only. Ava Willing Astor was in London on the day her ex-husband drowned. She had already, months earlier, at the moment Jack was marrying Madeline Force in the Beechwood Ballroom in September 1911, moved permanently to England with 9-year-old Alice, dividing her year between the Grosvenor Square townhouse and Regent Lodge. During the First World War, she served as vice president of the American Women's War Relief Fund and helped fund the American Women's War Hospital in Devon. On June 3, 1919, at St. Mary's Church in Bryanston Square, London, she married Thomas Lister, the 4th Baron Ribblesdale. She became, from that date, Lady Ribblesdale. The society caterer Rosa Lewis, who had once been Ribblesdale's lover, gave the line that every Ava biographer has since printed: not only willing, but eager. Ribblesdale died on October 21, 1925, in the Grosvenor Square townhouse. Ava did not remarry. In June 1940, she returned to the United States as a war refugee aboard the SS President Roosevelt. She reclaimed her American citizenship. She continued, in defiance of United States federal law, to style herself Lady Ribblesdale for the rest of her life. She died in her apartment at 720 Park Avenue on June 9, 1958, aged 89, having outlived Jack Astor by 46 years. Her estate at death was approximately $3 million. It went almost entirely to Alice's 4 children. To Vincent, the son who had chosen his father in 1910 and stood beside him in the Beechwood Ballroom in 1911, she left a token $25,000. She left nothing to charity. 2 individual wives had by then, between them, taken down 2 individual husbands. Alva had ruined a Vanderbilt heir. Ava had ruined the head of the Astor line and, indirectly, put him aboard the ship that killed him. The third act of this story is the industrial version of what those 2 women did one at a time. It ran for 18 years. It ended one American presidential nomination. It rewrote federal divorce statistics. And it began in a hotel dining room, 1,200 miles west of Fifth Avenue, at a table set with white cloths, in a Dakota town of 10,000 people. Chapter 10. The Dakota Loophole and the Cataract Hotel. 1,200 miles west of Fifth Avenue, in a South Dakota town of 10,000 people, a state statute inherited from the Dakota Territory turned marriage law itself into an arbitrage opportunity. The statute had been passed by the Dakota Territorial Legislature in 1867, 4 years after Congress carved the territory out of the Northern Plains. It listed 6 grounds on which an absolute divorce could be granted: adultery, cruelty, willful desertion, willful neglect, habitual intemperance, conviction of a felony, and it required only that the plaintiff should have, in good faith, been a resident of the territory for 90 days preceding the commencement of the action. When the territory split into 2 states at statehood on November 2, 1889, both new legislatures kept the 90-day rule: 6 grounds, 90 days. In New York, 1 ground and 12 months. In South Carolina, no ground and forever. If you were a wife with money in Manhattan, or Boston, or Philadelphia, or Baltimore, and you were locked inside a marriage the law of your own state would not release you from, and you could put your hand on the price of a Pullman ticket and a hotel bill, you now had somewhere to go. Sioux Falls sat on the eastern edge of the new South Dakota, at the intersection of 6 converging railroad lines. It was the closest and most reachable South Dakota point from any eastern city. A wife could board a Pullman sleeper at Grand Central Station on a Sunday evening, change trains in Chicago on Monday, and be checking into the Cataract Hotel in Sioux Falls late on Wednesday or early on Thursday. The whole journey ran 4 days. She stepped down onto a wooden platform beside a brick town of 10,000 people, and she found waiting for her the machine that would end her marriage. The Cataract Hotel stood at the corner of 9th Street and Phillips Avenue. It had been rebuilt in December 1882 after a fire, in 3 stories of red brick with a 4th-story tower. It carried 100 rooms, an elevator, electric bell service, gas and electric lights, steam heat, hot and cold running water, and stabling for horses. Standard rates ran $2 to $2.50 a night for a room. A wealthy divorce colonist did not, of course, take a room. She took a suite. The Baroness Maggie De Stuers, whose case is the theatrical opener of this act, rented a 4-room parlor suite on the top floor for $3 a day, remodeled it with new furniture, installed a piano, and had her intended second husband, traveling under the alias William Elliot, take 2 rooms down the hall. Downstairs, a billiards parlor, a formal dining room with white tablecloths and patterned wallpaper. In winter, the colonists tobogganed down 6th Street on sleds. Directly across 9th Street stood the Edmondson Jameson Building, which by the early 1890s held nearly a quarter of the city's 38 law firms, an entire divorce industrial midway on one intersection. 2 blocks away rose the new Minnehaha County Courthouse. Its 165-foot tower still had, in the winter of 1892, no clock faces, purple quartzite walls in the snow. The divorce seekers themselves nicknamed the building the Temple of Freedom. The specialist bar included the firm of Glover and Donovan, running classified advertisements in the Atlanta Constitution of August 5, 1894, reading, "Specialties, Divorce, and Corporation Law." The local attorney and future United States Senator Alfred B. Kittredge. The local specialist C.O. Bailey, whom one contemporary described as the man who had represented countless divorce colonists. And, lending institutional respectability from the state's founding generation, Judge Bartlett Tripp, former Chief Justice of the Dakota Territory Supreme Court and first president of the South Dakota Bar Association. Judge Frank Akins of Minnehaha County, a curly-haired 36-year-old, signed roughly 200 decrees in 1890 alone. The whole apparatus around the cataract was, in ways a modern observer sometimes misses, a small industrial ecosystem. 2 blocks of the town's business district were, effectively, subsidized by the trade. Every last thread of the local economy ran on one hard fact. The marriage law of 6 states east of the Missouri would not release its women, and the marriage law of South Dakota would. The mechanics were routinized to the point of assembly line. A wife arrived by rail with a maid, a trunk, sometimes a child, sometimes a chaperone who was in fact her waiting second husband. She took a suite. She hired a specialist attorney across the street. She waited out her 90 days. She received her mail. She took dinners in the Cataract dining room. She sat in Bishop Hare's pews at Calvary Cathedral on Sunday, much to his fury. She filed her complaint on a ground unavailable back home, before Judge Akins, or, if the case was politically loud, before Judge Charles Thomas in Deadwood. The whole file, from arrival to signed decree, ran 6 to 9 months. Because South Dakota's inherited statute contained no post-decree waiting period at all, a woman could sign her divorce on a Saturday afternoon and marry her waiting fiancé in her Cataract parlor on Monday morning. The Argus Leader of September 8, 1898, estimated the annual gross yield to the local economy at not less than $100,000 in cold cash. In a state with a total population of about 400,000, $100,000 a year flowing into one town from the marital misery of America's richest wives was noticed. The scandal that followed had a bishop's name attached to it, and the bishop is coming. But first there was an Astor niece with 200 dresses left in Paris. Chapter 11. The Astor niece who broke down the door. On June 13, 1890, in Paris, Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot climbed the staircase to Baroness Maggie De Stuers' apartment to certify her a neurotic unfit to care for her own children. Charcot was the world's foremost expert on hysteria. He ran a clinical service at the Hospice de la Salpêtrière outside Paris that saw women committed on a father's or a husband's word alone, kept for years, and returned, if they were ever returned, to households that had never really wanted them back. He was, in the domestic architecture of the Third Republic, the male instrument that a French husband could, with the correct signature on the correct piece of paper, deploy against an inconvenient wife. Margaret Laura Astor Carey De Stuers, known to her family as Maggie, was the niece of William Astor and John Jacob Astor III. She was the first Astor in American history to seek a divorce. She had married the Dutch diplomat Baron Alphonse Lambert Eugene Ritter De Stuers on April 20, 1875, at the family townhouse at 34th Street and Madison Avenue in Manhattan. The ceremony was jointly conducted by an Episcopal minister and a Catholic priest. Sally Delano, the future mother of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a bridesmaid. Maggie was 12 years younger than her husband. Her own income was $80,000 a year from the Astor family, $80,000 a year in 1875 money. It is the figure that explains, alone, how she could sustain the 4 years of European scandal she was about to have, and the 4-room top-floor cataract suite in which the scandal would end. According to Maggie's sworn testimony, delivered over roughly 4 hours of cross-examination in the Minnehaha County Courthouse beginning on February 8, 1892, the marriage had rotted from the beginning. Her husband had demanded that she use her beauty and her Astor money to advance his diplomatic career. He had, at least once, according to her testimony, instructed her to seduce a French minister of commerce. She had refused. Her exact words to Judge Akins, preserved in the surviving transcript: "I told him I was not doing such work. I refused flatly to thus place my womanhood at the services of the state." At a dinner party, in front of guests, she had said something Alphonse did not care for. His response in her testimony: "He jumped right up from the table, screamed at me, spit in my face, and said, 'I wish to God I had not married you.'" She had walked to another room, and later walked in the garden with her parasol. Alphonse followed. His response in her testimony: "He came up close to me, screamed in my face, grabbed my parasol from me, and swung it 10 or 12 times over my head. I told him, 'You might frighten your Dutch women that way, but you can't thus scare an American.'" Then came the Paris apartment on June 13, 1890. Alphonse detained his wife in the apartment under a pretext, told her that a sculptor was arriving, and then Dr. Charcot and Dr. Eugène Churlot from the Salpêtrière climbed the staircase. The maid, a Frenchwoman named Maria, ran into the room where Maggie was waiting and shouted a sentence that survives verbatim in the Minnehaha County court record: "The house is locked, the windows barred, your room guarded, and the doctors are coming up the stairs." Maggie escaped the apartment that night. She left in the flight. 200 dresses on the pegs of her Paris wardrobe. 200 dresses. It is the collapse to a single image detail of her life, and it is the collapse to a single image detail of the entire Sioux Falls act of this video. 200 dresses left hanging in a locked Paris apartment. A woman running for her life in whatever she was wearing. She disappeared for approximately a year. She surfaced on June 1, 1891, at the front desk of the Cataract House in Sioux Falls. Her uncle John Jacob Astor had, she testified, told her about the place. He said it was a thriving and interesting place and showed me photographs. This gave me the first idea of coming here. The cross-examination went on for the greater part of an afternoon. The Baroness answered, in careful sentences, the questions her counsel and then the defense had prepared for her. She did not, at any point in her testimony, appear to understand herself as the plaintiff in a scandal. She appeared, throughout, to understand herself as the plaintiff in a lawsuit. That, more than anything else, is what the Sioux Falls Colony did to the American concept of divorce in the 1890s. It converted it, in the mouths of the wives who used it, from scandal to illegal action. Judge Akins signed her decree of absolute divorce on the afternoon of March 5, 1892. He found the Baron guilty of, in the language of the decree, acts of extreme cruelty which have inflicted grievous mental suffering upon her. He awarded her custody of her youngest daughter, though Alphonse had by then hidden the child in a French convent, and Maggie never, in fact, recovered her. On the following Monday morning at 11 o'clock, Maggie returned to the same Minnehaha County courthouse and swore under oath that she was both single and unmarried, of sound mind, not deprived of civil rights, and could lawfully contract and be joined in marriage. 30 minutes later, she was married in the parlor of her Cataract Hotel suite to her William Elliott, whose real name was Elliott Zborowski. The Philadelphia Record ran, in the next day's edition, the sentence that made the colony an international scandal. Now that a niece of William Astor has joined the divorce colony in Sioux Falls, the South Dakota style of severing matrimonial bonds may become more popular than heretofore. The amazing elasticity of the complacent South Dakota divorce laws has up to this time escaped the attention of all but a few wandering actors and actresses. That sentence was the trigger. Once an Astor niece had walked through the Temple of Freedom, every Fifth Avenue wife in an unhappy marriage knew the door was open. The next woman through it would take down a former Republican presidential nominee. Chapter 12. The President's Son and the Presidency Lost. Mary Nevins. Blaine walked into the Sioux Falls Cataract Hotel in April 1891 with a beautiful singing voice, a 3-year-old son, and enough evidence to take a Republican presidential nomination away from her father-in-law. Her father-in-law was James G. Blaine, the Plumed Knight, Secretary of State, the Republican Party's nominee for the presidency in 1884, defeated by Grover Cleveland, still smarting from that defeat, still the presumptive front-runner for the party's next nomination in 1892, still, in the summer of 1891, the most consequential Republican in America not yet in the White House. Mary Nevins was 19 years old and Catholic and from Ohio. In September 1886, in New York City, after an acquaintance of 18 days, she eloped with James G. Blaine's youngest son, Jamie. Jamie was 17. Both families were appalled. Mary later testified, and the Daily Deadwood Pioneer of February 20th, 1892, printed the sentence verbatim that her mother-in-law, Harriet Stanwood Blaine, had said to her, "In 1/2 hour, if I chose, I can take that young man from you." And, in Mary's testimony, that is precisely what her mother-in-law did. Harriet Blaine, according to Mary's account under oath, physically locked her son Jamie in a bedroom, smuggled him aboard a steamer for Europe, and sent Mary back to Ohio, where she miscarried her second child. Mary Nevins Blaine arrived in Sioux Falls in April 1891 with her surviving son, James G. Blaine III, then 3 years old. She moved into the Cataract. She entertained the other colonists, according to one contemporary description, with a beautiful singing voice. Because Judge Akins had by then begun tightening his residency affidavits under clerical pressure, and because reporters had already located her at the Cataract, her attorneys moved the actual filing to Deadwood in the far southwest corner of the state, before Judge Charles Thomas. The freethinker orator Robert Green Ingersoll was retained as her national counsel, coordinating from New York. C.S. Palmer of Deadwood was her local attorney and stood in the courtroom. Palmer told the Boston Globe on August 2, 1891, "Mrs. Blaine's divorce will be granted. If Mr. Blaine Sr. should interfere, it might change the result, but I do not expect that to happen." Mary Nevins Blaine, cornered by a New York Herald reporter that same day, gave the following: "It is too bad that you are out here to stir up all these people who are trying to get out of trouble. Are they not unhappy enough? You should be more merciful." Judge Charles Thomas granted the decree on February 21, 1892. He awarded Mary alimony and full custody of James G. Blaine III. From the bench, he said the following: "It seems that Mrs. Blaine the elder did all in her power to make the life of the plaintiff unhappy. She was evidently opposed to the marriage and had concluded that the best thing for her son was to have them separated." James G. Blaine Sr., on hearing the decree, published a scorched earth public statement in which he attacked Mary's testimony as misrepresentation, called it a slanderous attack, and gratuitously disparaged the Catholic priest who had performed the 1886 wedding. Mary Nevins Blaine answered him 10 days later in the Pittsburgh Dispatch of March 2, 1892, with the letter that is, more than any other single document to come out of the Sioux Falls machine, the colony's manifesto. It should be read almost in full because it is a document a 19th century American woman was not supposed to know how to write. "I shall expect from you," she wrote to the man who had almost been president, "that considerate and honorable treatment, which I am sure your keen sense of equity and fairness will dictate. The powerful man of a great nation will surely accord to a weak and defenseless woman her full meed of justice. You surely can ill afford to withhold it. I wish it distinctly understood by you that I am not asking for sympathy. I respectfully demand justice. The powerful man of a great nation surely can ill afford to withhold it. I am not asking for sympathy. I respectfully demand justice." She was 25 years old when she wrote the sentence. She had, at the time she wrote it, no formal education past the female academies of small-town Ohio. She had, at the time she wrote it, no legal training. She had, at the time she wrote it, no counsel telling her what to send to the Pittsburgh Dispatch. She had, at the time she wrote it, a divorce decree in her hand, a small son at her hip, and a father-in-law between herself and the Republican presidential nomination she was about to help take away from him. She wrote the letter, she sent it, the Dispatch published it. The wire services picked it up. The New York papers picked it up. The Boston papers picked it up. The Washington papers picked it up. Within 1 week of publication, the sentence "I respectfully demand justice" was being reprinted in editorials across the country, over the initials MNB. She had learned, in 90 days at the Cataract Hotel and in a courthouse in Deadwood, exactly what any of the wives in this video had learned. A woman who takes a paper document out of a courtroom in her own hand is a woman who can, if she chooses, put a paper document into a newspaper. The political damage was measurable. James G Blaine Sr. formally withdrew from the 1892 Republican nomination race. Benjamin Harrison was renominated at Minneapolis in June. Harrison lost the general election to Grover Cleveland in November. James G Blaine Sr. died on January 27, 1893, less than a year after his son's divorce. Mary Nevins Blaine remarried the New York surgeon, Dr. William Bull. In 1906, in a story that closes the circle on this act as neatly as any historian could ask, she returned to Sioux Falls a second time to divorce Dr. Bull, and the Boston Daily Globe of May 8, 1906, ran the headline, "Going to Sioux Falls? Mrs. James G. Blaine said to be about to take up residence where they make divorces. Quick one woman, twice through the machine. One former presidential nominee derailed. One national election arguably tipped. And the machine itself, on the eve of its own dissolution, still, in 1906, running." Chapter 13. The Bishop, the Sermon, and the 6-month Rule. On New Year's Day of 1893, Bishop William Hobart Hare stood before at least 14 divorce colonists in his own pews and delivered the sermon that mobilized the state legislature. William Hobart Hare was known, across the American Episcopal Church of the 1890s, as the Apostle to the Sioux. His Calvary Cathedral at Sioux Falls, originally called St. Augusta, had been built with more than $25,000 in donations from John Jacob Astor III himself, in memory of Astor's late wife, Charlotte Augusta. The bitterness of the situation Hare returned to in the winter of 1891 from a mission trip to Japan is difficult to overstate. Astor money had built his cathedral. Astor divorce seekers were now filling it. In a private letter to his daughter-in-law, Hare wrote a sentence that a bishop is not supposed to write down. "The scandalous divorce mill which is running at Sioux Falls, with revelations of the silliness and wickedness of men and women, made my return home a very gloomy one. I despise people who trifle with marriage relations so intensely that the moral nausea produces nausea of the stomach. I have a continual bad taste in my mouth." When Maggie De Stuers offered 3 elaborate stained glass windows to Calvary Cathedral, Hare refused them outright. "I won't have them. I'd as lief paste up the flaming placards of a Lowe's circus." The windows were stored in the cathedral basement. They were eventually installed, years later, only after Maggie's dedication panels had been, in the phrase of the surviving parish record, laboriously scratched out. On the morning of the 1st of January, 1893, Hare's pews contained at least 14 women he knew, by sight and by name, to be Sioux Falls divorce colonists. He preached to them, and to the citizens of the town sitting behind them. The Argus leader of the following morning printed the sermon's central passages under the standing headline in that day's edition, "National Scandal." Some say that it is a good thing for South Dakota to have divorces and divorce suits. I say that it is alarming, and our lax divorce laws have become a national scandal. It is not so much the securing of a divorce which is so shocking. It is the consecutive polygamy which is practiced in marrying again so soon to a man or woman who has been courted while the suit for divorce to the former husband or wife was pending. Do we wish to be famous? This makes us infamous. Do we want credit? This is discredit. What then are we to do with the divorce industry? Dread it, dread it. It is the disruption and destruction of the family. Hare then traveled to the state capitol at Pierre, carrying a petition signed by 900 South Dakota citizens. He lobbied the legislature in person. He won. On March 3, 1893, Governor Charles Sheldon signed House Bill 90, lengthening residency for a divorce action from 90 days to 6 months, extending it to a full year in any case where the defendant could not be personally served in the state. The House passed the bill unanimously. The Senate passed it 26-13. Hare, walking out of Pierre in early April, gave the Argus leader of April 27, 1893, the line that closed his campaign. If the legislature had not wiped out the divorce scandal, I should have accepted a call elsewhere. But now that we have eradicated this evil, I feel that I can hardly leave this state. The divorce trade migrated immediately across the state line to Fargo in North Dakota, still under a 90-day rule. North Dakota extended its own residency to a full year in 1899, and the trade reversed direction. Sioux Falls entered its second wave from about 1900 through 1908. This is the era of Blanche Chesbrough Molyneux, filing exactly 1 week after her husband Roland Molyneux was acquitted in his second trial for the poisoning of Catherine Adams in November 1902, and marrying her Sioux Falls attorney Wallace D. Scott 2 months after the decree came through in September 1903. It is also the era of Flora Bigelow Dodge, arriving in January 1903 seeking what she described as a dignified divorce, raising chickens on residency to help fund it, warned by her attorney that the New York courts might refuse to recognize her decree, and that she might never legally live in New York as a divorced woman. The second wave ended cleanly. On March 3, 1908, exactly 15 years to the day after Governor Sheldon had signed House Bill 90, the South Dakota legislature extended residency to a full year, matching most eastern jurisdictions. Sioux Falls' comparative advantage evaporated in the same session. The trade migrated to Reno, Nevada, where residency ran 6 months, dropped to 3 months, and by 1931 was set at just 6 weeks. The Sioux Falls machine had run for approximately 18 years. It had dismantled several hundred marriages. It had extracted an aggregate settlement volume estimated in the tens of millions of dollars, and it had rewritten American divorce law by proving that a jurisdictional loophole in a Dakota state statute could route a national fortune extraction industry through a single frontier hotel dining room. Chapter 14. The doors they left standing open. The buildings survived. Marble House still stands on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, its portico compared to the White House, its gold room preserved as Alva Vanderbilt Belmont left it, its Chinese tea house still perched on the cliff lawn, where in 1914 100 women sat down to china marked in gold with 3 words: Votes for Women. The Petit Chateau at 665th Avenue was demolished in 1926, but Beechwood at Newport still stands. Ferncliff on the Hudson still stands. The Astor rent roll continued in reduced form into the 20th century. Even the Cataract Hotel at 9th and Phillips in Sioux Falls, having burned once, was rebuilt in 1900 and still stands, converted now to apartments, its rooms silent, its top-floor suites long since forgotten by anyone who ever ordered a Pullman ticket to leave a husband. The Minnehaha County Courthouse, the Temple of Freedom, still stands too, its tower now carrying the clock faces that in 1892 it had been missing. Every one of the buildings survived. Every one of the wives is dead. So is every one of the husbands. So is every one of the judges, the lawyers, the maids, the doctors, the bishops, the reverends who refused the $20,000 checks, the Providence Congregational minister who accepted one. The whole cast of the American Gilded Age is dead. What survives is the doors they left standing open. Alva Vanderbilt opened a door in Manhattan in 1895 and paid a Sunday's worth of public shunning at St. Thomas Church for the right to walk through it. She spent the rest of her life explaining what the door had cost her and what it had bought her. She sold her daughter to a duke to prove she could afford the toll. She married Oliver Belmont to prove that the toll had been paid. She spent the last 25 years of her life converting her divorce settlement, dollar by dollar, into the political funds that, in 1920, finally amended the United States Constitution to give the women who came after her the vote. She is buried in the Belmont Mausoleum at Woodlawn Cemetery under a banner that reads, "Failure is impossible." Ava Willing Astor waited 11 years for her mother-in-law to die, then had the sitting American president's brother walk her divorce through a sealed Rockland County hearing so quietly that the name Astor was not spoken aloud in the courtroom. Her $10 million settlement was, at the time, it was paid, the largest divorce award in the history of the United States. Her husband, 3 years later, socially unable to remain in Newport because of the door she had opened, married a girl younger than his own son and went abroad to escape the gossip, and died at 47 in the sinking of the Titanic. Ava Willing outlived him by 46 years. She died as Lady Ribblesdale in a Park Avenue apartment, having taken nothing from Vincent Astor's inheritance but a token $25,000 in her will's residual clauses. And in a Dakota hotel with a piano on the top floor, the machine that had been rehearsed by Alva and by Ava was industrialized. Baroness Maggie De Stuers came through in 1892 with the Salpêtrière doctors on her staircase and 200 dresses left in Paris. Mary Nevins Blaine came through the same year with a beautiful singing voice and enough evidence to take a presidential nomination away from her father-in-law. Blanche Molyneux came through, and Flora Bigelow Dodge, and Ellen Pollock of Nyack, the Irish former household maid, who won her $50 a month in child support through exactly the same courtrooms as the Astor niece. Notice that last name. Notice what it means. The colony was built for heiresses. It worked in the end for anyone who could put her hand on the price of a Pullman fare and a Cataract hotel bill. That is the second revelation of this story. And it is the one that runs down into the century that came after it. The whole American 20th century divorce infrastructure, from Reno to the collapse of Nevada's monopoly under California's no-fault reform in 1970, descends from a Dakota state statute passed by an 1867 territorial legislature and defended tooth and nail by roughly 200 wealthy Eastern wives who arrived by rail between 1889 and 1908. What began as the weapon of the very rich became, over 80 years, a universal legal right. And here, at the end of the video, you have to answer a question. Not about Alva, not about Ava, not about Maggie De Stuers or Mary Nevins Blaine or the bishop in Sioux Falls with the bad taste in his mouth. About yourself. Because you inherited the door they opened. You inherited the courtrooms they broke down. You inherited the vote Alva paid for, the right to hold property in your own name that the Married Women's Property Acts eventually delivered to you, the right to leave a marriage without your husband's counter-signature that the Reno pipeline eventually made ordinary. What did those women pay for it? And what have you decided to forget about the price? Alva paid a Sunday's cut at St. Thomas Church. Ava paid 11 years of a marriage she found repulsive, and the reputation of a son who chose his father. Maggie De Stuers paid 200 dresses in Paris and a daughter she never recovered. Mary Nevins Blaine paid a miscarriage and, later, a second failed marriage. The Sioux Falls colonists collectively paid, in the aggregate, a national moral panic that only a bishop's petition of 900 signatures could shut down. And Willie Vanderbilt paid the rest of his life in a French turf yard, and Jack Astor paid it in a lifeboat's absence, at 1:55 in the morning of April 15th, 1912. The men are the ones this video called the powerful men. The women broke them, but the men had been given the power in the first place by a legal architecture that said the wife's personality merged into the husband's on the wedding day, like a stream running into a river. What the wives did, in 3 acts, was reverse the merger. They took the money, they took the children, they took the moral standing, they took the position at the head of American society, they took the doors down, and they left the doors open behind them. You are living inside their divorce. Alva said it herself, before anyone else in the country knew what she meant. I always do everything first. I blaze the trail for the rest to walk in. I was the first girl of my set to marry a Vanderbilt. Then I was the first society woman to ask for a divorce. And within a year, ever so many others had followed my example. Failure is impossible. If you made it to the end of this one, subscribe. I go deep into the Gilded Age every week, and there are lives here you will not see anywhere else. Tell me in the comments, do you think Alva did her daughter a favor when she opened that courtroom door? Or did she only widen a cage the next generation would still have to climb out of? I read every reply.